Hello, everyone, and welcome to Soundtrack on the Cinematic Schematic, brought to you by thecinematropolis.com. My name's Alexander Bohannon, and I'm your guide and also a film scores nerd. And we're bringing you today a very, very special episode. But as always, I'm not alone. Joining me in this studio is Sir. Introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Caleb Masters, the editor-in-chief of the Cinematropolis and your voice of the Cinematic Schematic. Alex, I am super excited about today's guest, someone who's done a lot of work I greatly admire, and I think who has got some really incredible stories to tell us about his career and also his approach to film composition. Who we got today?
Absolutely. Lorne Balfe is joining us today here on Soundtrack, and I'm so honored and pleased that he was able to come in and carve some time out to talk to us today about his scoring of Mission Impossible 6, some of the games in the Call of Duty franchise.
He did Lego Batman, I think, right?
Yeah, just casually does Lego Batman.
Casually.
You know, and I mean, there's so much going on for Lorne right now. I mean, Mission Impossible Fallout Blu-ray drops tomorrow, Tuesday, December 4th. Go to your major retailer and pick up a copy. Not only will you have such amazing acting and directing and everything on screen that you get with your Mission Impossible film, but you'll also get a dedicated commentary track devoted to him discussing the score.
So Lorne Balfe is actually discussing the film. He has his own commentary track on Mission Impossible Fallout.
Absolutely insane.
Folks, that's not very common, and I can't wait to listen to it. But this is actually a big week for our guest, Lorne. He's also got another very big project coming to listeners this week.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me more.
So you know I like video games.
I only know casually that you like video games.
I mean,
no, you really
I super like video games, and I like video game scores. And Lorne Balfe was recently announced to be doing the Video Game Awards, which is the most prestigious award show in video games. And he's going to be both composing the live orchestra, and he's the music supervising director, I believe. So you're going to get to see all the music coming out of the Video Game Awards is done from the talents of Lorne Balfe. And for you out there who also like video games and also like cool announcements, and also want to hear Lorne's take on a lot of classic video game themes, make sure to check out the Video Game Awards, which is actually streaming basically on every single platform imaginable on Thursday, December 6th, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 7:30 p.m. Central Time, and for those of you on the West Coast, that is 5:30 p.m. West Coast Pacific Time. He actually spends a good deal of time, in addition to talking about Mission Impossible Fallout, to talking about his approach to video game composition.
Well, Caleb, I'm really excited to hear his approach to scoring, and not just on video games, but film composition and television composition as well. And of course, on the subject of film, we lead into the show today with the track Escape from Paris. And transitioning into our interview, we're going to hear the track Your Mission, both from Mission Impossible Fallout. Today, on a very special episode of Soundtrack, we have superstar film, TV, video game composer Lorne Balfe. Lorne Balfe is best known for composing music for films such as Mission Impossible Fallout, Lego Batman, 13 Hours, Secret Soldiers of Benghazi, Florida Project, video games like Assassin's Creed Revelations, Crysis 2, Skylanders, and the Call of Duty franchise, including TV shows like Genius, The Crown, and most recently the BBC One series, The Cry. Welcome to Soundtrack, Lorne.
Wow, I tell you what, I feel good about myself after that introduction.
I hope so, because that's an amazing body of work.
I think I need to cancel that therapist now, that's for sure.
Well, I mean, with a body of work like that, I just have to know, how do you find your way into composing music? Is it someone in your family, like your father, a composer as well?
Yeah, yes, he was a songwriter, and how did I find myself in? I think I found myself in it by really not knowing what else to do. In a weird way, I didn't think that I loved music. Music was around me constantly. Musicians were around me constantly, and I think it was just I took it for granted. I thought that's what you did as a job.
Wow.
You went and played. So I was very fortunate in that, because I think a lot of people in the arts, it's hard because they have parents that use the phrase, well, when are you going to get a real job? So thankfully I never had that, but I ended in, I started writing commercials, and then writing short films, and then that led into TV, and then film, and then games. And so I've just been very fortunate to kind of work in all, and I still work in all mediums. I still do commercials, and I still do video games. And I think 10 years ago there used to be a snobbery regarding it. You weren't you stuck to one platform, and then that was it. But those days are gone, thankfully.
No, that's super super interesting.
Well, so it sounds like this has always been like a lifelong pursuit. Like you just knew from a really young age. I'm curious, Lorne. Like, was there a particular gig that you composed that where you knew that, hey, the entertainment business is specifically where I want to invest in composing and building a career?
I don't think there was one particular job. I think it was just a natural journey that just kept happening, and it kind of, that path led to it. And some may say that I shouldn't have gone down that path, but I went down the path, and I think that it's there was music around that I loved, and films like Wall Street that Stuart Copeland did triggered excitement in me, and I just I didn't know it was film music, because I think 20 years ago when I was at school, I don't think people really discussed film composers, and now they do. And I think Stuart Copeland doing Wall Street was a major thing, and Rain Man by Hands, and The Lion King. There's a lot of movies that I kind of went, oh, this is interesting, and that was the path, really. So, but I personally, I'm yet to have it where I realise, yes, this is meant to become your professional job. Maybe soon I'll have it, but at the moment I haven't realised it yet.
Wow, it just sounds like you're constantly pinching yourself. It's like the kind of like, when am I going to wake up from this?
Oh, well, listen, you have to. If you don't, then you have to give up, because it's a damn luxury being able to firstly to do something that you love.
Yeah.
It's a rarity in life, and to be able to do something that is your hobby. Most of that, it is, music to me is a hobby. So this is just and I love films. My happiest memories is based around watching movies. So it is a dream come true, and something like Mission definitely is, because I was a massive fan of the franchise, and each one it was part of my youth and then my adulthood. So to now be part of that family is just it's a great opportunity.
Sounds like everything's kind of come full circle for you, right?
Depends. Depends on how you look at it with certain things, but yeah, there's very few franchises out there where the movies just get better and better, and Mission is one of them. Each one just keeps beating the prior one. So yeah, it's great to be on part of that family.
Yeah, and I have to say, because Caleb and I did this thing where we watched them one a week, and because I hadn't seen any of them leading up to the release of Fallout, and each one gets increasingly better, and that just floored me. And when I saw Fallout, it just best one in the franchise, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's interesting because so many, everybody's got their favorite one, or the top three, and it is interesting because see, mine obviously has got to be Fallout. I think is my favorite, and then the first one is my second, and then MI2 is my third. But it's interesting, you know, some people don't rate MI2 anywhere, let alone in a top 5 or 6 list. So it is great that everybody's got different tastes.
Yeah, that was kind of the interesting thing, the conversation going on online when the film came out. It's like, rank your MI Mission Impossible movies, and I've got to say, it's definitely, to your point, not as clear as I expected it to be, because I was like, well, yeah, obviously it's these 3 films or these 4 films, and then everyone online was like, actually, no, Ghost Protocol's the best. No, Rogue Nation's the best, or oh no, the original. So yeah, I think that's a fun conversation every time, and every time a new one comes out, I feel like it reopens, and everyone has to rethink it every time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your process? So you're tackling a franchise that already has a large body of composed work associated with it, which of course includes Mr. Zimmer's work in that body as well. So how did you go about, unifying a sound that's already been established, but then pushing it somewhere new?
I think the thing about it is that I think you don't. The first thing you do is don't sit there and try to do that.
Oh,
because I think as soon as you do, then you get into a rut where it's like being told, sit down and write me a number 1 pop song. I think you've got to kind of somehow distance yourself, and I think Fallout was just it's a visually different film than the rest. The storyline, the development character of Ethan Hunt's far deeper, and Elsa's journey also, but yet it still belongs to those characters. And I treated it really as if Lalo had written the theme the day before and sent it to me. And really it was to treat it that way and look at the journey, the musical journey, that way, and not necessarily try to treat it as retro or a pastiche. It was just, the film is visually obvious that it's this period of time, so it was a case of instrumentally working that way. So that's how I looked at it. It was just to try to treat this iconic theme with utter respect, but just and not try to make it sound more modern. It was just to use it in a more present form.
So I'm just curious, when you're working on a film of this scale, what is that composition process like? Maybe you could talk a little bit about working on both from the creative side and on the business side of the production process.
That's a good question about the business side, because I think it's interesting, because you kind of there is the creative side of it, obviously, but then there is the fact that you're working on one of the biggest movies of the year, and that's kind of on your shoulders also, which you kind of have to sometimes try to forget about, because if you don't, then you're petrified every morning. But I think you have to. I've worked on a few franchises now, and I've always I always try to think about what the story is, but most importantly about the fans' experience. And I think that when you listen to the filmmakers discussing the movie, whether it's the director or the producers, you hear the same thing. It's not a selfish point of view. It's what is the experience that the cinema goer is going to get out of it. So I think with the music, you remind yourself about the heritage. I watched a lot of the TV show when starting off, and thankfully I'd seen all the movies because I was a fan. But I went back to watch the TV show because that's their original DNA, and that was a kind of an important factor to kind of keep to be reminded in, and some of the instrumentation with the you've got a great theme, but also you've got those other themes like the plot theme, and so you've got that musical side, but then yes, you've got the business side where it is nerve-wracking that you're on such a high-profile movie, and the music can mess it up. And I think, but the good thing about it was the whole writing the score was a very unique way, because I actually wrote my studio was right next door to the editorial room with Eddie Hamilton and Chris. So, and I was there for several months. So that made it very unique and just great to be able to kind of work on ideas whilst they were still filming and editing. You know, I started writing maybe 8 months before the end, where sometimes I get brought in 2 weeks before the end. So it was a luxury, and I think it created a more experimental way of working.
Wow, I think that's really fascinating, because I think that's being right next to the studio where it's edited, the building where it's edited, offers a lot of really cool opportunities that I'm sure most jobs don't, or fewer jobs do. But I'm curious, could you actually go in depth a little bit and talk about how the process for Fallout, because of that, differed from scores you've worked on in the past?
Well, I think that time is a major factor, because I think that with Fallout, we had an amazing luxury to be able to, especially with the test screenings, was to be able to, unlike a lot of test screenings where you have temp music placed throughout it, Chris doesn't work with temp music. So for each test screening that we had, I was writing the complete score. So there was always kind of a lot of sleepless nights kind of building to those screenings. But what it meant was that there was no excuses, and it wasn't a case of you were watching a massive action scene and the music was from Inception or Batman or something. It was all music that was specifically for that scene. So that was a major different way of working, and also being able to start so in advance. Chris and I would talk about scenes, and when I first, before I got the job, we had a lot of breakfasts together talking about the movie, and when he started talking about Ethan's story and the concept of what this film was about, I kind of went away and I just started writing music. So I thought it was easier for me to write music to describe to him how I felt rather than talking about it. So I wrote a lot of music that I felt was representing what he was telling me. And thankfully, he liked it. So that was a big relief. And because sometimes, you know, the composers, the last to get an invite to the party, everyone else has been working on it for years, and you get brought on, and the writers and the producers and directors know who these characters are, and the composer comes in like a month or two before and writes a piece of music and says, "Here, this is his theme," and it's very hard to. But the great thing, the great thing about it is, thankfully, somebody else had written my themes, so it made my life much easier. But yeah, we created our own temp track, and that would change. Some scenes would change because they were experimenting with the music, and it was a constant luxury to have this experimentation going on. So that's what was unique to it, and I think that we were then able to sit back with an audience and watch it and realize the music was not working. So you can redo it, and I think a lot of scenes, like after the Paris chase scene, when they're in the boat in the underground, going through the canals, there for maybe 6 months, there was another cue there, which was the same piece of music that you hear at the wedding, right at the opening.
Okay.
And that piece, and the same piece that you hear when Cruz is walking through Paris and Elsa's following him. That piece was originally in the water underground scene, and then when watching it with an audience, you just found that the energy went there, and it worked. It was beautiful to watch, but it ruined the actual experience. And then, because of that luxury of being able to be sitting next door to your editor and director, I think Eddie Hamilton had the idea to do the plotting theme there, And Chris said, "What about with snare drums?" And we had no snare drums throughout the rest of the school, and wrote it in my room, and then watched it with an audience, and it worked. So being able to test the music was a major rarity also.
I have my notes pulled up here, and that was one of my big questions, was the use of the snare in the score. So that came out of like one of those experimentation processes for you?
Well, the snare thing, no, it came from this kind of it came from. I wish I could say I took credit, but no, it was Eddie and Chris, and it was their idea, and it was this the build energy and this military thing. You know, the bongo thing.
Yeah,
I kept sending Chris recordings of these bongo sessions I was doing, where I think he thought I was going a bit crazy because he didn't quite know where they fitted into the score. But I was trying to kind of experiment with the bongo is so essential to Mission Impossible. It belonged in the original TV show, and it was of that time. And I think that I started off with one, and then I added another 3, and then I added another 4, and the sound was just becoming something that we had not heard before, and also playing them with drumsticks and brushes and different techniques of playing them. Then when hearing them, it enlightened us to what is the sound of Mission. And again, it's like the opening of the movie, probably right until I think maybe a week, 2 weeks or a week before we finished, was originally a different piece of music, and it was much darker and more broody, and it was it's actually the 2 notes from right in the middle of the plot theme that Lalo had written, and it's this just ba-da-ba-da boom, and it's just this beautiful big jump, which is just it was like, gosh, this is the most quintessential villain theme ever. You know, modern film schools have been trying to kind of minimalize and get more straightforward to the point with themes, and Lalo had written this 40 years or whatever ago, 40 years ago, and it was in the middle of his theme, and that's how we originally opened it up, with very dark textures, and then all of a sudden, after hearing the bongos, I wrote this different piece, and it changed the whole mood of the first 15 minutes. I think it made you kind of draw you in, and also very like the beginning of Mission 1 that started off with snare drums. It was just something that drew you in instead of just setting a scene.
Very cool. So, and I'm just curious. It sounds like you guys, because of you had the advantage of having all that extra time to experiment and tweak for these different test screenings. How close to the actual release were you guys tweaking the score and the soundtrack?
We were still experimenting until hours before the movie was finished. I think that there was,
wow.
You know, there is writing the music, but then the music's got to work with all of these elements: sound effects, dialogue. And I think that sometimes people don't fully understand that the music's got to weave in and out out of the whole experience. And now we're mixing in Atmos, and that's a total different way of how the music works. And there is, you know, it would be lovely to be able to stand in front of an orchestra like John Williams and have everybody perform at once. But filmmaking is changing, and we have to evolve with that. And we recorded all of the elements separately, which is a lot of people do, and it's a shame to not have your brass playing with your strings. With us, the major problem is that we weren't able to fit all the musicians in to the same room, because it was just gigantic. And we recorded at Air Studios in London. We also recorded at Abbey Road in London because certain cues we felt, you know, needed a different sound, and the whole was great for very grand and epic scenes like the Halo jump. But then for more intimate scenes, it made sense to record at Abbey Road. But our brass was, 20 French horns, no, not 20, sorry, 12 French horns, 12 trombones, 4 trumpets, 2 saxophone players. It was a massive band, because these visually, these stunts were so epic. But also, most importantly, we wanted to be able to be big but then small also with the score.
Oh wow! I think that's really interesting. Just talking about how you piece it together and mix the element. It's all done. Sounds like in the post production versus, like you say, live. Like a lot of folks might traditionally picture a scoring session.
Well, yes, because the thing is that what you write when you're watching it may make sense, but then when you're on the dub stage, all of a sudden, the engine noise of that car or motorbike, the frequencies of it don't work with what you have written. And so if you've been able to record all of your short strings separately without the melodies on top, you're able to adjust the mix and weave them in and out of those sound effects. So it makes it a more connected audio experience. And listen, I'm a fan of the old way of doing it, but it's harder and harder to do that now. And also, picture changes constantly. You've got, with technology now, you're able to keep editing until you finalize that movie. So the process is totally different, and I think also sometimes, we with this film we would record some of the melodies even separately, because in hindsight, when watching it would clash with the dialogue. And I love melodies, but unfortunately sometimes they can draw you out of what the story and the narrative is trying to tell you. And I think it's like the mission briefing at the beginning of the movie was just one of the hardest cues I've ever written. And I think maybe I wrote it like 15, 20 times probably. That's a safe number, because it was the mission briefing to all of the Mission Impossible movies are so important, because this is where you get your information for the rest of the movie. And we recorded quite a few different ways, and there was very atmospheric versions and drone based, and much more musical ones. And then of course the voice changed also with that scene, and different actors brought different frequencies to it, so all of a sudden your music wouldn't work. So it was a hard scene, I think, for all departments, not just music.
One thing I think is so fascinating is the fact that composers now have the technology to be just like a complete, you can be so technical and scientific about it, and you're looking at frequencies and things like that. That's something, from the outside looking in, you never ever consider how it can all build almost like a scientific formula into a cohesive piece.
Yeah, yes, but then that is the process of filmmaking. I think I still can't get my head round when you're watching a movie and the fact is they're talking, but actually they didn't say that line when they filmed it. They have to go back into a studio because there was an aeroplane going above their head when they were filming, or somebody coughed, or something destroyed that dialogue line, so they have to go back into the studio and watch themselves and re-record it. And sound effects. When it sounds weird to say it, but it is amazing when somebody puts a key in the exhaust. It's not happening visually. They do that with sound effects, and how it's all layered. It's just amazing.
One thing that I really particularly loved, because this score was a day one purchase for
Good.
me, because I just loved it. So hard.
You had at least 2 sales right here. So.
Screen capping.
I think there was 3. My mother bought a copy, so it's fine.
Oh, so it's like on the I'm leaving the theater, and I'm already pulling up the iTunes previews. I'm yep, bye. Okay, anyway, sorry, big moment. But at times during the score, you actually use silence or near silence, maybe just some kind of atmospheric notes to really great effect. So, whenever you're deciding when a moment in a film should be accented by silence versus being punched up with a music cue, what goes through your mind whenever you work with that? I mean, I'm assuming you're working with Corey and you have all your test audiences, so
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer. Silence is so hard to figure out. I think it comes down to taste, and I think some movies it works in so many ways. Sometimes the director feels that he didn't get or she didn't get the performance that they wanted, and that they want music all over it to try to compensate for what's missing. Where sometimes I look and I feel that, well, the acting, you can only cover it up so much, but it's the taste police monitoring those things, and I think that it's the same with, especially the trend now with action movies. I think maybe more 4 or 5 years ago, but there was a great trend to kind of have your big iconic action sequence have no music, and then that kind of started changing again. There was so many times I'd work on a film and I'd write like an 8 or 9 minute action sequence, and then I'd watch it in the cinema and like 5 minutes had gone, and you're like, what? Why did they remove that? But you just got to constantly look at the bigger picture and know if there's overkill or not. And I think Chris has just got amazing taste when not to use music. And I think that, like, one of the first scenes that I watched was the bathroom fight scene.
yes.
And that I still think it's one of the best fight sequences in movie history. I think it's just astonishing. And then secondly, I thought, I have no clue how you score this. Because we hadn't talked about it, but I just thought, well, naturally, there's going to be some music, and I could not figure out what on earth you do. And then we were watching it, and then the first thing he said, "Well, we're not going to have any music here," and I thought, "What a relief!" Because I just thought, whatever you do, it's got to either make it comical or turn it into something where you don't connect to it. And there's something so primeval about that fight.
Yeah.
You feel that you're in it, and also there is a soundtrack going on because it's the nightclub, and there is the sound of an underbelly bass just booming in and out that kind of builds in tempo and fades away, and that's the soundtrack. So I think the ability, I'm still trying to learn that factor of when do you do music and when don't you, and how do you introduce it and when you don't, because I don't think I think it's hard to know that, and I think that's what differs great composers from, I know many great composers that are great film composers. Because you can write a great piece of music, but then if you can't present it properly and introduce it so that it's not intrusive, then it doesn't matter. So it's a difficult one to choosing when it comes in and when it doesn't. And I'm personally still trying to figure it out and learn from it, because it's very easy to have constant music in a movie. Pulling out is the hardest thing.
Well, I'm really glad you mentioned your collaboration with the writer-director Christopher McQuarrie. I'm just curious, how would you describe your experience and maybe even your process working with him versus some of the other directors you've worked with?
Usual Suspects is up there in all-time classic movies, and he created that, and so you're in awe of somebody like that. It's the same time I worked with Michael Bay. All those movies from when he was starting out were the reasons why I got into film, and they're part of history, and a film history, and you may like them or not. That's a different conversation. But the fact is that they were all periods of important filmmaking time, and they were part of my history and my stories, and the same with Chris. So it was kind of very intimidating because he is a great filmmaker, and I think that the process was as great as a experience can be. You're getting to work with people that are at the top of their game and live and breathe movies. It cannot be anything but amazing for you as a composer. So if you're wanting a bad story, unfortunately there won't be one. It's interesting, and you learn a lot. I took a long time kind of wanting to do my own movies after working with Hans for so long, because I really did not feel I was ready. And I was constantly learning from whenever we would do something like Kung Fu Panda. I was just in awe of John Powell and seeing him and Hans work, and just going, gosh, this is, there's a lot still to learn. And that's the process. And working with somebody like Chris on a movie like this is just, yes, you learn so much about a different point of view and great filmmaking.
Yeah, I think that's really incredible. I know I'm a big fan of Christopher McQuarrie's work. Yeah, Usual Suspects was a big one. He did Edge of Tomorrow recently.
Edge of Tomorrow, yes.
Yeah,
and Way of the Gun. It's just it's one of those things where you're sitting, you watch a movie like that, and maybe halfway through you're already on IMDb trying to find out who made it.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
So I'm actually glad that you touched on your relationship working with Hans Zimmer. So I'm just curious, like, what was your first project working with Hans Zimmer, and like how did that relationship develop?
Batman Begins. So it began by I had worked for a few other composers. I was assisting them. And my first boss over in LA was a great composer called Henning Lohner, and I worked for Henning, and then I was working for Rupert Gregson Williams, and it was it was just the right. I was at the right place at the right time, and like many things in life, I was around. And I think, like the first time I worked for Henning was needing somebody that could read music and play the piano, and said, "Can anybody do it?" And I said yes, and I lied because I couldn't sight read music because I'm dyslexic. But I thought if I said no, I won't get the job, so I said yes, and then I just stayed up all night doing this piano working note for note, bar by bar, transcribing it. But I did it because I just knew if I said no, that was the end of the story. So I was kind of around Hans' circle, and then Batman Begins. Yes, Hans said, "Could you help out on this?" And I said yes, and he'd asked if I knew the studio setup and the way we all write as a program called Cubase, and I said yes, and again I lied. I had no clue how it worked, but I thought I'm not going to miss this opportunity. So again, I stayed up all night, learnt the program, and then that was the beginning of it. I started arranging for Hans then, and maybe 14, 15 years. I was working on, I think, the majority of his movies. So it's and we still do things together now. We just finished a video game, FIFA.
Oh, nice.
That's just come out, and yeah. So we're still we even after, our working relationship was longer than the majority of marriages. So the good thing is that we still talk, unlike most of them.
That's obviously clearly a perfect match, and great to have a collaborator like that you can rely on.
Well, I listen. It's a very lonely job most of the time, and I think that he's from the band background where it's a team effort, and people walk in, improvise, play things, and that's the way he works, and he loves working like that. And it's still odd for sitting there for him to play something and say, "What do you think?" It's like I still don't understand why he gives a damn about my opinion, but because it's he's created the most memorable pieces of music, I think, of all of our time, if not all time. People will constantly remember his scores. So it's a I was very fortunate and very lucky.
Wow, that is an incredibly surreal experience. And throughout all of this, I mean, you've done a lot of work across so many different mediums. You mentioned you did video games, and you've done TV, and you've done film. So do you have a different take on when you compose for a different medium?
No.
TV and video games. Oh no.
No. The thing is that I think as soon as you do, I think you're kind of devaluing the project you're on. The fact is that people still have a snobbery over video games. People still and people kind of look at them as, well, it's just what teenagers do, and that is just utter nonsense.
Oh, preach.
It's before, I think when I started out doing video games, they would always compare movies, and they'd say, well, we'd like it like this movie, or it would be great if it could be like this movie. And now you notice filmmakers are talking about games.
Oh, yes.
It's a different platform, and composers didn't want to ever work on video games, and now they're chewing at the ankles of game developers to want to be part of it. Very few film composers who haven't done games. Even John Williams' music is used in games, so technically he's part of it. But it's now part of our psyche, really. And I think that even if it's a 28-second commercial, it's the same. You've got the same job as a 2.5-hour movie. You've got less to write, thankfully, but it's still the same. You've still got the same task, and you've still got to create something unique to what you're seeing, sonically different, but take the audience on this journey. So I think it's it's all the same thing. It's just the quantity of music. On games, you can end up writing hours of it. But the hardest thing is still those first 10 minutes trying to say, what is the sonic story that we're going to do?
I think that's a really fascinating perspective to touch on, because I was really curious. You've worked on some pretty high-profile entries of the Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty franchises, and I'm kind of curious. These are games that are especially notable for their cinematic presentation. So obviously, you have the same approach to creating scores for these different media and video game. But I'm curious, what's the process difference between doing a film versus a game? I was thinking more about like the delivery and the creative process. Like I'm sure it's a lot different because like you said, games are a lot longer, so you're composing a lot of music. I know, like even though you want to emote the same emotions, I imagine it's probably a different way of doing it because gaming music loops a lot more. For instance, I would suspect.
I think certain games. There was a game I did, Beyond Two Souls, where it's a total. It's like a feature film experience, and the gamer has the choice to to choose the destiny of that character. And so every scene I would write maybe 3 or 4 different ways, because she may not do it, or she may do it, and the outcome is a different emotional response to that. So you kind of, yes, you have to with that kind of game, it's a different process, because you're writing kind of the same scene several times. But the reason I really got into games and was really through doing the trailers for Activision.
Nice.
And that's how I got involved with Assassin's Creed, because I'd started being asked to do their trailers, and then they kind of came to me and said, "Well, look, you're doing this to picture. Do you want to look at some of the cinematics in the game?" And so that's how I creeped my way into Assassin's Creed, really. But yes, there is a technical difference, because you're obviously with an action scene. If it's a picture, you're following actual hit points, and with game music, if for instance an action scene and it's not an actual cinematic scene, it's gameplay, then it's more of a mood that you're creating. And I think with that, I always base it off the fact that I write a piece of music that's 2.5 minutes long or 3 minutes long, and look at it as intensities. So you have a full intensity, which is your full-on action cue, and then your middle intensity, which is less full-on action. It's more possibly you could imagine somebody in semi of a chase, and then the lower intensity is more atmospheric or drone-like, so that there's probably no movement going on, so that they're able to cut back and forth to it. So you've kind of got to look at it as like Lego kits, really. The task in hand is the same task, but yes, it is about delivering music in a different way.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm always curious, because I know there's like those small nuances in the way that music's delivered in the media. So I'm always wondering, process, what's that?
Well,
like?
Especially with how games are so cinematic these days, it's like you can get like a punched up action cue, and it's like how would you? I mean, I had no idea how you would adjust for something like that.
Yes, exactly, and I think that each game company will work differently, because they've got different engines.
Yeah.
So some games will, this is very simplistic, but some games the music will change if the character turns left or right. Some game engines, the music will just stay the same. So each company will work differently, and yeah, you've just got to keep a dialogue going on with the audio team on the game company, because really it's that you give them the music, and then they go free with it, because sometimes you write maybe an hour or two of game music, but the gameplay is 28 hours long. So the music that was for that scene isn't necessarily always going to be in it, or be used somewhere else. But then that's what happens in films. You write a piece of music that you intended for that scene, and the director and editor will go, actually, this works better here, and that's the process. That is the process. It's not just about working. You've got to work as a team.
The collaborative process. I think so many, again, it's like one of those like stereotypes for like kind of lay people, like myself, where it's like you like, oh yeah, director, it's like top down and whatever he says goes. But it sounds like throughout all of this, there's like constant dialogue through all of these different departments going up to the director or the director for the game.
Yeah, and also the fact that there's so many people, same with games as on film and TV, that all have input. So it's not just a case of you write a lovely piece of music, somebody will phone up and say, I don't like trumpets. And even though the subject matter is about the army, you have to mute. You have to remove the trumpets. It's that is the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
You initially ask yourself, what trumpet hurts you, and then and then you do it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but well, there's a great story about some film session that was happening, and they were recording, and a producer kept saying to the composer, "Can you turn the violins down? They're just too loud. It doesn't work." So there was silence, and they said, "Okay." So then they did it the second time, and he said, it's still too loud. The cellos, and it went on, and then finally the producer left, and somebody said, "What did you do?" And he said, "Nothing. We're doing a brass section."
Oh man! Oh no! Oh man!
Oh wow.
So it is. It's just one of those. That's the journey we all do.
So I do want to circle back a little bit here. You mentioned working on Batman Begins, which, I mean, a fantastic score, and honestly really kind of paved the way for the sound of superhero films later in Inception. But I'm curious, you also worked on Lego Batman, and I think you were listed as the main composer on that, and that's a score I know we both really love that score. What was it like working on a brand as beloved as Batman? I mean, obviously, Mission Impossible is such a huge franchise, but I know Batman's kind of in a totally different category for superheroes. So, what was that like?
The weirdest thing is that I think the reason I got Lego Batman wasn't because I'd worked on the other Batmans, because I think if they wanted the composer of Batman, they would have got Hans. So it wasn't that. It was, I think that the director liked a movie I'd done called 13 Hours.
Oh yeah.
And I think that the way he talked about Lego Batman, Chris McKay, the way Chris talked about Lego Batman was that it was to play it deadly serious. This is as if this is a proper Batman movie. It's not a parody or a pastiche or anything. This is as serious as it gets. So working on Lego Batman was fantastic, because you got to do something where I think nowadays you could never, like, Hans wrote one of the best villain themes ever, which was the Joker theme, and he streamlined it and made the concept of a villain theme no longer sound like Frankenstein from 1945. Villain themes are very difficult to write, and I think that at least with Lego Batman, our Joker, it was a case of going more funky psychedelic, because that was the motion of the Joker. The Joker kind of. So I think Lego Batman, that was just fantastic to do that. In regard to the other Batman ones, I don't know how Hans kind of started off on that journey, because it was just truly unique, because I think Danny Elfman's Batman was so pinnacle. That music came hand in hand with Tim Burton's visuals, so they belonged, and I think that I learned a lot working on the Chris Nolan Batmans, because I think what Hans did was create the modern day superhero where you don't necessarily need a fanfare when you enter a room.
It's so interesting to me to see the evolution of the sounds of Batman, because, I mean, Caleb and I saw Lego Batman together, and both of us were like, this feels like Batman. This doesn't feel, like you said, it's not pastiche, it's not satire. It is legitimately Batman, and I think that was aided in part by your score, because of this. It did feel like it was treating the subject matter completely seriously, which I appreciated as a Batman fan.
Yeah, well, also I think that the other thing was is that the songs were the escapism in Lego Batman. I'm Batman, the first song at the beginning of the movie. It's deadly serious. This is his song that he sings every day. Yeah, it's kind of ironic, but it is. He's so egotistical. That's his own soundtrack.
That's amazing. So I have a kind of a strange question for you. what is a question that you know you're never asked in an interview, but you wish somebody would?
Well, two-part answer to that. Weirdly enough, relating to Batman, a question that I do kind of get asked, but it makes no sense. It is the references to other Batmans. So somebody will kind of analyze it and say, "Oh, well, you used the four-note motif from Shirley Walker's Batman," and it's like I have no clue what you're talking about. There's great analyzing it where I think it's more of it's a feeling. Batman is of a gothic world.
Mm-hmm.
It's a man dressed as a bat that lives in a castle. You can't get more gothic than that. So that's that's kind of more people kind of would ask me questions about that, which the question wasn't warranted because there was no. I think somebody had even analysed I had put in Elliot Goldenthal's theme with Danny's theme and Hans' theme all at the same time, which I wish I was that clever to have figured out to have done, but I'm far from that. So what question do I wish that I would get asked? It's always a difficult one. It's like when somebody asks what your musical influences, and it's always, I think people always kind of want to do the cliches. They love the same classical references, and I say the same cliches.
So I'm curious, as we start to wind down the conversation, I always like to ask the question. We like to ask the question on Soundtrack: what advice would you offer for our listeners out there who are interested in pursuing a career in composing music, or even more specifically, maybe film scores?
Well, it's my advice is probably semi unpopular. I think the main thing is don't study film music. I think that you can be a fan of film music and enjoy film music, but I do think that studying it, I don't quite know where that. If you then want to become a film composer, studying it, I don't understand where that gets you, because I think that if you look at the most original voices working or have worked, they didn't study film music. They studied music, and then they studied film. And I think that's we're all doing it. I'm doing it. Trying to find that unique voice, and that unique way of working to picture. And I think that the more when you look at music colleges and that do film music degrees, where they have part of their exam is to rescore the English Patient, a scene from the English Patient. It's why are you doing that? The guy that did it won an Oscar. He did a good enough job. But most importantly is that I don't understand how you get credited or you get marked on that, because the fact is that unless the director is sitting there with you, you don't know if it's right or wrong, because you could rewrite that scene with nothing and maybe one triangle hit and that's it, and nobody can say that that's right or wrong, because it's what works with the picture. So that I kind of don't quite understand, and I think that you've just got to, if you want to get into film or game music, it's to learn the craft of music and be a fan of movies, because that's why we do it. It's that we love movies. And I think that if you kind of just study how John Williams writes a piece of music for that certain scene, I may be missing something here, but I know from a lot of my friends that are composers also kind of all have this general feeling that it's not. Don't be analysing it, because that piece of music, there's a chance it never belonged in that scene.
Yeah.
And so when you start thinking that, or kind of what we were talking about, a director, so I don't like trumpets and I don't like snare drums, and you see 40 horses cavalry soldiers going into war, and you go, oh right, and now you could analyze it and go, well, why didn't he use that? You don't know the context of why that piece of music was written, so it's hard to analyze it and focus on listening to music and contemporary music, classical music, and learn that craft. That's my advice, because it's no different than being an athlete entering the Olympics. You've got to know your craft and know everything there is to do with it. The same way as, yes, if you're working with a director, they talk about movies. You've got to know what they're talking about, and that's what makes it very interesting with film schools, because I did a podcast maybe a month ago, 2 months ago, and they had a great game in it where they played a piece of film music but backwards, and then they gave you 3 choices, and it was interesting because now I could have this totally wrong, but I think I got 6 out of 6, which I was very impressed with, because when I didn't know we were doing, I didn't know that we were doing this damn competition. I thought, oh no, I'm never going to get. But I remembered the music from the film, because I don't buy soundtracks, and I don't listen to them, but I remembered it from the movie, because when I watch a movie, I'm very aware of the music now. So yeah, so long-winded answer, and I could be wrong, so don't listen to me. But if you want to become a film composer, just listen to music non-related to film, and watch movies and learn that way.
I mean, I think that's amazing advice. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see in 10 years' time when somebody says, "I wish I hadn't listened to that idiot."
Oh, wow. Well, so where can people find and follow the work that you do on the internet and for your compositions? Do you have like a social media handle? And
Oh, well, no, I've got my brand new website, lornebalfe.com, which is just fascinating and full of, well, actually one really exciting thing about it is that we're putting unreleased music on it.
oh,
nice.
Awesome.
So there's, when you make a soundtrack, and again that's another like 2-hour discussion, is knowing is how to make a soundtrack and how to represent it, and I think that it's like with Fallout, we Steve Lipson, that mixed the soundtrack, had a brilliant idea about opening the soundtrack out with, starting it off with not how the film begins, but really what represents the movie. So we started off with the beginning of the movie, but then it actually then jumped straight to near the end, the helicopter, and sonically in that first track, we wanted it to feel, this is the journey you're about to do. So making soundtracks is that's another story. But I've just been very aware of people on Twitter and Facebook asking me about, why is that cue not on the soundtrack? And I thought, okay, I'll shut them up by basically putting it on my website.
There you go.
So we're spending a lot of time. I'd like to say I am, but actually Queenie, who works with me, is doing it. Yeah, we're just making sure that, because a lot of time and a lot of great musicians and a lot of people spend a long time creating this, so we're just kind of putting it onto really all of the films, so that yes, you can go to Amazon and iTunes and buy that soundtrack, but the main thing is to be able to have access to all these other cues that aren't necessarily there.
Excellent. So that's lornebalfe.com. Before we let you go, you've got the Mission Impossible soundtrack that is out, and the Blu-ray is coming out on home video December 4th, I believe.
Yeah, with its own commentary by myself.
Oh man!
So you'll have two and a half hours of my dulcet tones talking about the whole score and how we recorded it and how we came up with some of the cues. I talk about the musicians that played on it, and yeah, just going through every single cue.
That's amazing. Day one purchase.
Absolutely, much buy it. So that's
and an isolated school also.
Oh, that's fantastic. Excellent. So we've got that on December 4th. Is there anything else, any other upcoming projects you can talk about today?
I just finished a great BBC show called The Cry, which you won't see because it's in Britain. But then I'm very happy to be working with Michael Bay again.
Oh wow!
On his new movie Six Underground. So I'm thoroughly enjoying doing that at the moment. And yeah, Michael is he's an idol of mine. So to be able to kind of work on his movies is always a dream come true. So yeah, I'm doing that. I'm very excited about it.
That's amazing. Well. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today. And well, everyone, that's our show. As always, please rate and review the Cinematic Schematic on iTunes. That helps hear the show and have people tune in. I'm at Alexander Bohannon on Instagram and on Twitter. Where can people find you, Caleb?
People can always find me tweeting about films and all the great scores we're listening to on Twitter at C Masters Talk. That's letter C Masters Talk.
Do you Twitter about bad scores?
We actually haven't done a lot about bad scores.
I know, Alex, you did a special, like on a separate podcast you guest hosted and did a whole show on bad film scores.
You know what? Yeah. I did. I forgot about it, but yes, I have talked about it.
Mean.
But I don't like the dogpile on scores because, I don't know. I like to look at the things that are awesome and talk about them.
Yeah, it is an interesting one because the thing is that it's like, my favorite movies have got some of the cheesiest scores possibly attached to them. Same. Like the Burbs, and I'm not talking about the Alfred Hitchcock, The Birds. I'm talking Tom Hanks, The Burbs, which has got, I think Goldsmith just went and did every cliche of his own, which was great. He embraced it, and it's the same as I think the original Scream. It just it's got every cliche known to man in it, but it's great.
Yeah, no, I understand. I love the score unironically for The Princess Bride, which is just some of the amazingest synth you can ever hear.
See, I love that, and I was working with a director who actually. He weirdly enough, he said that is the worst soundtrack ever. It is just horrendous, and I like it because it's of that time.
Yes.
And it's like I was watching The Running Man, Arnold Schwarzenegger last week.
Yes.
Just great. It's just great music, and of course it wouldn't stand up. It wouldn't work now, but it's great. So,
yeah.
Just a random thought on that line because I love how you put it because both of those films, the score is of the time. Would you say that like the worst scores are the ones you don't remember? Because I mean that's the thing. People can dogpile on those and call them not great, but we remember them. Those stick with us. The Running Man. I can play that in my head right now.
Yeah. Who knows? It's like. It's like the movie that wins Best Oscar. People are sometimes not going to remember 2 years later.
Yeah, or it wasn't the one that should have won that year.
Yeah, well, always remember One Direction came third in the X Factor. They never won technically, and I bet you nobody can remember who actually won that year. So yeah, I don't think it doesn't work that way.
Well, on that note, we're going to close out our show. We're going to be followed by the track Battle Royale from Lego Batman, as composed by our guest, Lorne Balfe. Well, as always, we're Soundtrack, and we look forward to trekking with you again next month.